Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Strauss. I'm a staff writer and senior political correspondent for the New Republic. I'm with my partner in crime, staff writer Grace Segers, and Cody Keenan, who has written a book called Grace, completely coincidental to the name of my co-host today. Cody has been the chief speechwriter for President Obama in the final term of the Obama administration, and then for the 4 years afterwards. He has written this book, Grace, about sort of a pivotal period in our nation's history, and the subhead of the book is called President Obama and 10 Days in the Battle for America. And we are very happy to be doing the first live interview of his book tour today. So thank you, Cody. And yeah, Cody's also are you a native Chicagoan like me?
Yeah,
I think we've talked about this. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
But he hails from the north side, unlike the south side, which has the better baseball team, although not currently. And he's pointing to a jersey for the team that has bought its way to a World Series rather than the White Sox.
Ouch.
Okay, which teams are these? Which one is the good one and which one is the bad one?
The White Sox are the good one.
The Cubs are the good one. The White Sox are the bad.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Sure.
Wait, actually, I want to bring this up. Hasn't it occurred to you, or hasn't it come up that your boss is technically a White Sox fan? Has this come up in discussion?
Never heard it before. It came up. It came up in our very first meeing in 2000.
Well, I mean,
we'll get along. We're like the odd couple.
So let's get it right into the book and talking about sort of this. I guess I want to start, Cody, beyond our list of questions, with one just about, like, how do you tell when there's a pivotal sort of few days in American history? Because it feels like we've had a lot of those lately. And during the last president's administration, it felt like every day that ended in Y would have been a pivotal moment for any other president. So could you talk a little bit about how you chose these days, and if sort of pivotal has changed since then?
Yeah, I think you decide that with hindsight and the benefit of time. If we thought every day was pivotal in the last administration, you look back now and you have a hard time remembering which were. These 10 days weren't clear to me as they were happening. I mean, each event was kind of monumental on its own, but you're not going through them in real time saying, okay, this is day 4. The book is divided up into 10 chapters, one for each day. And it takes a little while, I guess, to really see it. It was actually the Trump years that kind of crystallized it for me. And it was 2 years to the day after day 10, which was, and we'll get into the events, I'm sure, but I did a little tweet storm about it and it kind of took off. And that was the first time I thought maybe there's a story here. So it's not, when you're living through it, you're just kind of, you're feeling the same emotions as everybody else, but you're also kind of working your tail off inside the White House to try to write a dozen speeches at once.
Mm-hmm. I guess also, like, some of these days in particular, the ones that stuck out to me, gay marriage, Obamacare, I mean, those are pretty sort of positive, exciting days for advocates of both of healthcare and gay marriage. I mean, do the days since then seem particularly dark to you? Because they do to me.
Yeah, yeah. But there were days, the first day of this book was marred by a white supremacist shooting, an act of racial terror. So it's not like all of them were great. And it's not like, the book never makes the argument that every day of the Obama years was sunshine and rainbows. It makes a broader argument about American history and the trajectory of progress, just to kind of walk people through the book, because it's not even out yet. These 10 days began with that shooting in Charleston and ended with Obama's Amazing Grace eulogy in Charleston. And in between, we were all, we had no idea which way the Supreme Court was going to rule on marriage equality or Obamacare. And so we're preparing speeches for every outcome, and whether or not Obama was going to deliver a eulogy was actually an open question for most of those 10 days. But you put all those events together in real time, it was almost chaos, but with the benefit of hindsight, they all kind of get at the same fundamental question, which is, who are we as Americans? What does this country believe in? Who belongs? Who matters? You've got a killer who just decides that Black people have to go. You've got a Supreme Court who might decide that gay Americans are second-class citizens and can't get married like the rest of us. You've got a Supreme Court that might decide that working people don't have a right to a government guarantee of health insurance. So all these questions about who matters and who's a citizen kind of came to the fore like never before.
Mm-hmm. Grace?
Yeah, I really want to focus on, in my questioning, that eulogy you mentioned that President Obama gave. I remember it very vividly when it happened, and Obama began singing Amazing Grace, and there was just this ripple of shock that clearly went through the audience that was there, but I think also through the American cultural consciousness, because it was a very powerful and potent expression of mourning, but also hope that was at the same time specific to the Black church, but also universal. And in reading the parts of the book where you talk about how that came together, a lot of that came together and was motivated by the president himself. And it wasn't necessarily this scripted moment that you had totally planned for. It was more natural than that. And I think there's a very fine line between going off script and having it be a horrible gaffe, and going off script and having it be incredibly powerful and remembered for years. So first of all, just how do you toe that line in determining, whether to go off script and what that may look like? And then second of all, and two-pronged question, the role of sort of ad-libbed moments in speeches. Why are they important, and what role do they have in the larger speech?
Yeah, the first question's easy. There was no debate. It was all him. It was his idea and his decision. And, it's people have asked before, they're like, did you write in there, like sing here? And no, that's not something you want to do. He had added one of the things I'm proud of in the book is I try to get as honest as possible about what it was like to write with him. And it was a real challenge. It was very difficult. I think, I know we had a great relationship and still do, but it was really, really difficult to write for Barack Obama. And especially in a week like this with a eulogy like that touched on some very sensitive stuff. The night before the speech, he just kind of tore up the back half and reworked it himself. And he channeled a lot of what he wrote through the families of the victims in Charleston who forgave the killer in that extraordinary act of grace, through a letter he received from his pen pal, Marilyn Robinson, who I only learned about the morning of, and marriage equality happening that morning, and it just kind of opened up this, it was like a thunderbolt of justice, like you said that morning, that after people have been marching for decades for progress, suddenly it comes down, and new avenues in America were possible for millions of people. So he had an open heart as he was doing it. And he said that morning, if it feels right, I might sing it. And he went up and made that decision by himself. That is not something we would have pushed him into. In fact, I think in general, that's probably something we might have cautioned him against, because you never know how singing's going to go. But he had a good faith in his ability to sing. He sang Al Green at a fundraiser once and hit the notes right, so he was confident he could do it. But to answer your second question, ad-libs always terrify a speechwriter. You work so hard on this draft and everything's in there, and it's not just you and the president. There's a whole team that looks at it: policy people, comms people, lawyers. And then for someone like Barack Obama, he would, on a major speech like this, he'd go through several drafts. So by the time it hits a teleprompter, he's not reading something he's never seen before. It's exactly as he wants it, note for note. And you just kind of read the audience when you're going to ad lib. If he was going to give, whenever we did rallies with college students, for example, he'd ad lib in maybe 10 minutes and just lengthen the speech. And I always had great faith in his ability to do that. You don't want to do it when there's something really significant or important at stake. One of the first things that pops into mind was, back in like the first week where COVID got really real, like an NBA game stopped mid-game. Tom Hanks got it. This is serious now. And President Trump addressed the nation and just kind of winged this part about Americans abroad. And you see the very next morning, airports in Europe are like overflowing with terrified people trying to get home. And that's what happens when you speak before you think, before you do anything about it. So you want to be careful. You don't want to cause a problem for yourself or kind of just manifest with your words a bigger problem somewhere else.
Yeah, I did enjoy that line where you talked about how sometimes it was difficult to write with Obama because he was very confident in his speech writing capabilities. And I think, was it that he called himself like the LeBron James?
That was his political ability. He did call himself a better speechwriter than his speechwriters. And about it was his political ability. He just said, "I'm LeBron, baby."
Listen, Cody, one thing I've wondered about the parallel between your job and mine is the "come see me, let's discuss" note that Obama is known for. And when, you're a reporter and you get edits being like, "Call me," or "Let me get it, I'm going to give you another crack at this line or this section," and your heart just plummets because you've written something you think is acceptable or good, or you think it's what this person wants, and then it just sinks like a stone, right?
Yeah, when you get that call, it's never so they can just give you a gold star and say great job and send you on your way. I think, probably the main difference between your job and mine is when your editor calls you, they don't tell you to come over to their house at midnight. At least I hope not. But that happened with us. He kind of lives above the store. So, with the Charleston speech, it was I was about to go to bed at 9 o'clock because I'd been up for 3 nights straight between all the different speeches, and I got a phone call from the switchboard, and it was the president asking me to come back in at 10 o'clock. So I just kind of threw on a jacket and went into the White House and went into the residence, and we worked on the speech together for a while. But we were just extremely fortunate as speechwriters to have somebody who not only was a writer, but cared about it and walked you through edits rather than just, handing his edits to somebody else who handed them to you and you have no idea why he made them. I tell this to my students now and to any clients, if the most powerful person in the world can take 15 minutes to explain his edits to you, then anybody can do that.
In my visit, on my side, Cody, like edits, depending on the reporter and the editor, it elicits different kinds of discussions and strong emotions a lot of the time. I don't know, man.
It's hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah. But I did, in reading this, I did feel some sort of understanding of like looking to, because you're not, in my business, you're not always necessarily trying to write for in your voice. There are, like, I have a friend who works for The Economist, and his mandate is to write in the voice and thought of this multi-100-year-old publication. And could you talk a little bit more about like getting into that mode? And then I want to talk about Charleston and the shooting in that day.
Yeah, the job is to write in his voice, and like anywhere else and anyone else, it just takes time to learn. I never interacted with him one-on-one throughout the entire first campaign because I was in Chicago and he was just always on the road. The first time we worked together on a speech was in the White House about 2 days after he took office. And even then, as a junior speechwriter, I didn't see him often, maybe every few weeks. So everything I learned and absorbed was from John Favreau, who's chief speechwriter and had been with him at that point for years. And they kind of honed his worldview together in the Senate office before they even ran for president. Then once I became chief, I'd see him almost every day. And that's when you really start to inhabit somebody and learn what they're all about. Because you want to start to figure out not just what the person wants to say, but why they want to say it. What's their life experience that informs it? What's their worldview? What are their moral and ethical underpinnings? And that just takes time to learn.
We got a question in the Q&A that I think is interesting and kind of ties into talking about working with the president. Was there, or were there any books that he tasked you with reading, or any particular ways that he wanted you to connect with him, and any recommendations that he made to do so?
Yeah, it was less individual books. And funnily enough, on that point, I used to go in and ask his assistant Ferial, maybe every couple weeks, just I'd say, what's on his nightstand? Because I'd want to know what he was reading, and I'd try to go read it too, just to see what he was thinking about. What he did suggest was, and I actually wrote a piece about this last week at Esquire's request. He suggested James Baldwin. And, if he had to pick one, it was The Fire Next Time. But his advice to me early on when I became chief speechwriter was read James Baldwin when you're stuck and listen to John Coltrane when you're not. And it was pretty solid advice. But that's really it. It was the only other times he would recommend something specific is when we were still actually trying to figure out the presidency in general. There was a moment in September 2008 when the economy really started to fall apart, Lehman and Bear and all that. And it just starts, we knew at that point we were going to win the election, even though it was still 6 weeks away. And Obama emailed all of us, the speechwriters, and he was like, hey, why don't you guys start reading some FDR? Start thinking about what it's going to take to talk to Americans who are going through what might become a depression, which is pretty terrifying. And in 2010 or 2011, when we were starting to deal with like a truly recalcitrant Congress, he said, read some Harry Truman, see how he dealt with that. But otherwise, the only books he specifically assigned was James Baldwin.
Yeah, I would be remiss without asking this, because today's a day where I believe they've started doing the Supreme Court has started oral arguments on their next session. Again, Cody, I found this book, your book, pretty optimistic in the end. Like, there were these like tumultuous times, but it doesn't, when I think about the high court in the last year or so, or even what's coming next, which is like a serious danger to voting rights right now, it's hard to imagine the same level of sort of that the outcome could be positive in sort of a similar way. Have you been thinking about that or reflecting on that in the past few days?
Sure. I don't think there's any way the outcome is going to be positive. And they're going to come for marriage equality at some point too. They've already come for reproductive rights, and it's terrifying. And it's, it doesn't negate anything in the book. Don't worry. I'm very careful in the book to say that what Barack Obama has always said, which is that progress is fragile, and sometimes for every step or even leap forward, like in those 10 days, you can take 2 back. And that's the real trajectory of America. I mean, if you zoom all the way out, the trajectory is overwhelmingly positive, but there are also periods where there's really intense backlash to that progress. And we're living through one of those periods right now, and it's awful and it sucks. And there's no easy fix to it either. So yeah, I can get dark and cynical, but I also know, having lived through it, that progress is possible. And the events in the book too, nowhere do I give Barack Obama credit for them, other than Obamacare, which he kind of pushed through sheer force of will. But marriage equality wasn't his. That's a result of 50 years of collective action. And even Obamacare was the result of a 100-year movement for universal health care, and we're still not all the way there.
Right.
Obviously, we've had a civil rights movement for not just 70 years, but 400, and we're still not that close to where we need to be. So the book is just supposed to show you that real progress is possible, in massive bursts sometimes, but only because of consistent, concerted effort.
I do want to ask you about our current president as well, who I think one of the things he is most well known for is his ability to be consoler in chief in moments of grief. That is often considered one of his best attributes in communication. And that's a very important part in your book, talking about how a president can guide people through grief. So I just want to get your take on Biden's skills in giving a speech, his strengths in terms of being that kind of empathetic president, but also are there any weaknesses that he has that you as a speechwriter would like him to tighten up a little?
Sure.
Tell the world what's wrong with your boss, Cody.
He's no longer my boss. I mean, as consoler in chief, there is no rival. You know, Obama played that role well and wore that hat well, but it didn't come from personal experience for him. He was just talented at it. And there was no one else over those 8 years who had to hug the families of every mass shooting, and he did. You know, for every time he went and did those eulogies, he'd spend 3 hours with the families, and it's just emotionally draining. For Biden, obviously, I don't have to run through his life story. He just suffered again and again and again, and it makes it real. I've watched him console people in person, and there's the air shifts in the room somehow. It's just this intensely emotional experience. But people give him a harder time than he deserves for when he gives speeches. Like, first of all, let's admit he's old. Duh. Like, we all know this, and there's this weird kind of beating around the bush about it, where it's like, is he all there? He's just old. Like, everyone who's old gets like that. My father gets like that. I hope, well, hey, Dad. It's just, that's the way it is. I stumble over words sometimes too. It doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing or what you're reading. And I think they're doing, I know his chief speechwriter really well, Vinay Reddy, who's just one of the world's great guys, and everyone else on his team. And it's really hard to break through in today's environment. You know, I think you look at the Obama years hindsight now, and how many of the 3,577 speeches and statements do you remember, right? I remember tons of times when, we were in a down cycle and the media was just crushing Obama, saying, why can't he break through? You know, he can't change anybody's minds. It happened all the time. And things are different now than they even were a few years ago. I mean, this president came into office during a pandemic where for 2 years, most of the staff wasn't even in the building. They just didn't get that chance to work together and harmonize. He came into office after, followers of the other president stormed the Capitol trying to overturn the election. I mean, it's just much more difficult now to try to change minds than it was for us. And most Americans don't pay attention to the day-to-day of the presidency. You know, I'll see on Twitter, I'm on the White House email list, and there are some mornings where I just don't read it, so I don't know what he's doing that day, and then I'll see on Twitter where he is, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. That was the same for us. You know, who would know on any given day when Barack Obama was at an auto plant in Ohio? So it's just really, really hard to break through, and it's always tempting to pin that on the communications team. I know, because I've gotten the brunt of it before. It's the challenge.
Let's talk, for instance, about one of the early days, back to South Carolina, the shooting there, the sort of the shadow of this big sort of debate on the Confederate flag. It's weird to ask like someone on Team Obama about this, but like, have you noticed or seen a level has it become more difficult for lawmakers to unify in sort of any moment? Have you seen any shift, not only in like the frequency of shootings, but the response in leaders to do that? Like, it was very rare last week, for instance, that we heard a top Democratic official saying a top Republican official and a possible opponent in the next presidential election shared kind words while talking about a disaster. Like, that should be normal, but in this day and age, it seemed very unusual. And I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, it's rare and rare because you get punished by your base. And I think that's It's true. It is. I kind of hate to use the phrase on both sides. It is true on both sides. It's more true on the right. You just get punished by your base for you suddenly become a rhino for saying anything nice about anybody. But it's also, there are times when just performative gestures, I don't care. After a sitting member of Congress was shot in the head, Gabby Giffords, in 2011, when she was doing an event in Tucson with a bunch of her constituents, and they made the nice gesture at the State of the Union address to rather than sit on each side, they all kind of intermingled, Republicans and Democrats sitting together. Fine, that's all well and good. But then when push came to shove and they had to vote on background checks, Republicans blocked it. So which is more important? I think everybody, sometimes likes to see the whole kumbaya thing, but I think people would rather see real progress.
I want to ask a couple of questions for you as a generalist. So someone who is an expert in speeches, speech writing, delivering speeches. We are only a few weeks away from some very critical midterm elections. I want to get your take on who you think are some of the best communicators out there on the campaign trail right now from either party. Are there any particular candidates or incumbents who you think are just really effective at that?
I mean, John Fetterman's social media team deserves all the trophies in the world. And I don't know who they are, but it's just like, it's like, those, how you can lower a basketball hoop to 6 feet sometimes, just dunk on it, like your Air Jordan in his prime. It's like that. Well, I want to be careful here not to offend anybody. Beto's always been good on the stump. The question is, how far can that go? Governor Pritzker in Illinois is pretty savvy as a politician. Governor Polis in Colorado. I don't want to offend anybody by leaving them out, but there's an interesting bench, and the way I'll kind of duck the question is by saying one thing that does give me hope and optimism is, and I think it's an important legacy of the Obama years, is that with each cycle that comes by, you get more and more candidates running for office who, quote unquote, aren't supposed to be running for office. And I say that because I think of something Michelle Obama said at the portrait unveiling about a month ago. She said something really amazing in her speech when she said, a little girl like me wasn't supposed to be here. And then I started thinking, who gets to determine what supposed to means? And we all do, is the answer. So I think the fact that you had a Black first family that worked really hard to carry itself above reproach for 8 years in the White House, and you had an entire generation growing up just seeing that as normal as any other White House, is really, really important. And with each year, you see more and more, younger, browner, gayer, more representative of America people running for office at every level. And I'm hopeful that that's just begun. And the next, I was going to say the next Obama, and I don't even mean that. The first somebody is out there, because Democrats often fall into the trap of, we need a charismatic leader who gives great speeches in order to fire us up to go vote. And that's just not the way to think about it. We're not always going to have a charismatic leader who gives great speeches. But it's still incumbent on the rest of us to keep moving and keep pushing, because the people who finally won the Dobbs decision did that for 50 years, rain or shine, until they finally got what they wanted. And we have to have the exact same approach on, Democrats care about every issue. That's one of the things that sets us apart and makes being a Democrat so challenging and makes messaging so challenging. And so whatever issue that is, we each need to just grab on to it and push until we get what we want.
There's a point in your book where you describe sort of Joe Biden sort of spoiling or getting ahead of the administration on gay marriage, right? And I remember actually watching that conversation. I was on weekend duty at my job at the time. It's been sort of, you talked about that moment in your book, and I've read sort of recaps of like Obama going into the room and smiling and just being good-natured to his vice president when he could have been like, you ruined the moment or something. But that Biden also felt like a very different one than the one that is sitting in the White House now. He's not sort of it's weird because you were talking earlier about him being old and sometimes saying things, but it is not in the same way to me that he was of saying, gaffes and gaff prone things. Could you talk a little bit about sort of, I guess, that moment and sort of the Obergefell decision and gay rights and the effect that Biden, as you write in your book, sort of spilled the beans early, and contrast that with what we're seeing now, which is an older president, but also, I guess, a little more reserved in a way.
Yes and no. So with in 2012, when he just kind of came out, no pun intended, before the president in support of marriage equality. And it's just, that was classic Joe Biden. Something's right and something's wrong. And he had just met with, I think, a gay family with 2 kids who loved their dads. And like, Joe Biden's just going to say, why not? Let's have gay marriage. And good for him. I was thrilled by that. It was one of the few things I was always disappointed with us in, is that, there were a lot of conversations above my pay grade back then about, when the president should come out for marriage equality. And that's just one of those issues where you should just do it. And, what's funny is sometimes what passes for revolutionary in politics is just finally saying something that everybody knows to be true, but nobody says it, right? So, DC kind of went into overload when Biden came out for marriage equality, saying, is there a rift in the White House? Are they at odds? No, not really, not at all. And then the president, came out the next week and said in an interview he was for it. And America kind of collectively shrugged, because the country was already there. The approval for marriage equality was already above 50%. He'd missed it by a couple of years. And so it wasn't really all that. I mean, it's important when president and vice president come out for it, but it wasn't exactly revolutionary because they were just behind the curve. Contrasted with today, trying to think of right and wrong where he should do that. And the first one that pops out was the MAGA Republican speech he did about a month ago, maybe. And again, Washington just kind of went into, fainting couch, pearl clutching overdrive, like, oh my God, how dare he label people things? But that was an important speech. You do have a faction of a political party led by almost every elected Republican that is trying to overturn elections, not just the last election, but they're stacking state and local offices with people who are determined to do it the next time. They stormed the Capitol. And, I always kind of chuckle when someone says, but isn't it rude to just call people MAGA Republicans? Well, first of all, they wear it on their hats. Mm-hmm. So I doubt it's that offensive. And he also took pains in the speech to separate, MAGA Republican politicians from normal Republicans. The point of that was to try to create a permission structure for traditional Republicans who might not enjoy what they're seeing from their party, to not support that part of the party. And so I think that was a pretty bold stance for a president to take. And yet it's kind of like what I was saying before, that sometimes the bold stances are the ones that everybody already knows.
Daniel, I think you had a follow-up in our notes as well.
I do. I didn't. I actually wasn't looking at our notes. I guess I sort of wonder now, based on what you said, Cody, is like, what would your speech writing team and your then boss, how would they address MAGA Republicans? I mean, former President Obama has said if he was running today, he would have taken more liberal positions than he did at the time when he ran. What would you guys, I mean, surely you've thought like, I would have done this or something, or addressed this differently. Again, man, I'm getting older. It just feels like that era, the Obama years were a more unified time in this country, which is absurd. And if I heard which is wild to think.
Yeah, but every generation thinks that. I remember when after I graduated college, my first job was in Congress in 2002. And even then people were bemoaning how the Senate had lost collegiality. And now you look back at like 2002 and it seems like a golden age of bipartisanship. I think it feels that way for every generation. And it's probably also true that polarization is getting worse for a whole host of factors. That's for a different conversation. Um, it was, I want to say it was equally bad for us. I mean, we didn't have people storming the Capitol, and threatening. We didn't have sitting senators threatening political violence if they didn't get their way. But you did have in the very first year, throngs of revolutionary cosplay people protesting with nooses, right, and painting Obama as a witch doctor, and that type of stuff was new at the time too, and a little bit shocking. And it's just our capacity to be shocked just kind of keeps moving further and further to the right.
Yeah, I would say I don't remember the Obama era as particularly unified.
Grace is young.
Okay.
That too.
I mean, I was young. I was 13 when Obama was elected, which I am only saying in revenge for Daniel pointing out that I'm young. If you're going to point it out, then I'm going to rub it in your face.
Fair.
But I do wonder, yes, the Obama era wasn't exactly a time of sunshine and rainbows. There was the Tea Party, there was birtherism and the ugly racism around that. I mean, the rise of Trump and of Trumpism began during the Obama era. But then again, today, as you were saying, the polarization is, if not significantly worse than it was at that point, at least perhaps a smidge worse. And I just kind of want to dig into what Daniel asked, like, how would you respond to the kind of toxic politics that we are seeing today? Is there anything else that the Biden administration could or should be doing? And I know you don't want to get yourself into trouble, but is there any particular route that you would take that you think they're not taking?
No. And I think a lot of what you can do is just carry yourself above reproach to make yourself look like the person who's at least trying. I always get frustrated when people are like, "Oh, Joe Biden promised to be a uniter." What does that mean? Does that mean he's going to make everyone in the country think the same thing? That's impossible. By that metric, the country has never been unified, ever, not once. You can point to, like, right after 9/11, Bush had a 91% approval rating, but what does that do? We ended up invading the wrong country. That's not what it's about. You can give Biden credit for, he's passed a lot more big bipartisan legislation than Barack Obama has, right? So that's one way of being unifying. But what would I have him do differently? It doesn't mean that you have to, you can compromise on legislation, but you don't have to co-opt someone else's positions. There's always kind of this push on the Republican side to say, do what we want or else, this hostage taking. And we're going to see it again with the debt ceiling, because it always happens. If you don't completely come around to our positions, we're going to tank the economy and your presidency. And then how does it fall on Joe Biden to be the one that has to unify that? It never makes sense. So he doesn't, both he and Obama carry themselves a lot differently than the last president did. It was his mission to divide every single day in every single way. That's what he did. And he was pretty much only talking to his base at all times, which can be an effective tactic for being popular with the base. It's not very effective for unifying the country, and it's not effective for winning re-election either.
So Cody, 2 questions on writing this book. I don't know if your Instagram is public or not. I've snuck on there. You posted a picture yesterday of you as what I can only imagine is a Muppet. But I think in actuality, what it was is a picture of you having finished the book and done the last chapter. It did not look like you would recommend writing a book again. What was the easiest and hardest chapters in the book? And what do you say to your students at Northwestern when they ask, can I be like Mike? How do I be like Mike? How do I become a speechwriter and write a book?
Yeah. It's funny, like anything else, we all get amnesia, right? And I think probably writing a book in the moment was just miserable. But now I look back on it really fondly. I'm like, oh God, that was fun. It's like having kids, right? The only reason the human race exists is because we forget how terrible a baby can be. I did enjoy it. I like writing because it's difficult. Finding the right words, making the right argument, being precise with all of it. It's difficult. It's really, really hard. And I teach my students that 10% of the speechwriting process should just be getting it down on paper, and 90% should be revising. There's someone once said there's no good writing, only good rewriting. And that's when I had fun. Getting out the argument at first, doing the research can be a real struggle, but actually getting to play with what you've written and make it better is a lot of fun. Selling a book isn't super fun, but now that now that the tour begins, the first live event is tonight here in New York City with Cal Penn, and then I'm off on the road for like 3 straight weeks. And you can find all the events at codykeenan.com. But that I'm really looking forward to, like actually getting out and getting to meet people who've read the book is going to be really, really exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
I will say, Cody, like Maggie Haberman has a book out right now. And she's basically also telegraphed. She's been nervous about it. Like every single author sort of like holds their breath once the book comes out. So,
yeah, I mean, if I were her, I wouldn't be nervous. She's got every platform in the world. I think she's going to be just fine. Like even the Times newsletter this morning was the Maggie show. And my book is diametrically opposite. I don't think we're in the same kind of pool of potential buyers. But I will say I'm always, and you guys read the book, you know this. I always hate everything I write, and I never think it's good enough. Every draft I ever gave him, I never thought it was good enough. I think maybe twice I just knew this is good, and they ended up being some of his best speeches. This book is good, and I feel really good about it, which is a little terrifying and fresh to feel good about it. But I do. I'm really excited about it, and the early reviews and feedback have been exciting. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think this book is going to rely on word of mouth in a big way, but I hope it sticks around, because what I truly want it to do and be beyond, this is a story that just needed to be told, because it's so. When I was writing it and telling my friends that all these events happened in the same 10 days, they're like, dude, I remember all those events, but in the same 10 days, are you kidding me? And so it's just a story that I wanted told, but I also wanted to do for my students and young people what some books used to do for me, which was inspire me and convince me that going into politics is a worthy and noble endeavor, and actually fun and a good place to spend your time and energy, and I want, anyone who's justifiably grown cynical these past several years, read this book. It's a broadside against cynicism, and it'll make you believe in something again. That's what I really want out of it, and that's why I'm kind of excited that we're only 7 hours away from it being loosed upon the world.
Yeah, I also can't. I have to ask this question, Cody. I think I've hinted at it in conversations before. Since you were in the White House, since your boss was in the White House, there's been this trend of nicknaming political opponents. That's what's in vogue right now.
I hate it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like a 4-year-old became like a speechwriter for some of the most influential members of Congress. Not so much. So I want to know not so much what you think of that. Why are we seeing that? Why has it been so effective for Trump to name President Biden Sleepy Joe Biden, or wacky Elizabeth Warren?
What he was effective at more than anything else is getting attention for himself, and that's always been true. I mean, I'm no Donald Trump psychotherapist or expert, but I think we can all agree he's very good at that. But to what end? What did it do? What did it accomplish for him? His legislative achievements were very, very few. He didn't win re-election. He did all sorts of damage with his words, and kind of gave this permission structure for the basest elements in American society to kind of crawl out. But it didn't do a lot. But I think you have all these copycats thinking, if I do the same thing, I'll get some of that magic off. I will say one of the smartest tweets I've seen recently, and I can't for the life remember who it was, but everyone's all spun up on whether or not DeSantis is the next Trump. And someone tweeted, look, all it's going to take is for the two of them to stand on a debate stage and Trump calls him Miss Florida, and it's over. I mean, hopefully someone in Trump world wrote that down. but it's dumb. Barack Obama never gave anybody a nickname in politics. It's one of those things that makes this whole thing seem small and petty when it doesn't have to be.
I want to ask a very generic, like have to ask question. Before we let you go, I want to know, what are some of your favorite political speeches, other than, of course, your own?
I mean, I don't think the answers will surprise you all that much. JFK's speech at Rice University is my all-time favorite, simply because it's so ambitious and audacious and funny. He actually deploys humor, which I'd love to go off on a tangent on that, because one of the big things that's really lacking in our politics these days is a sense of humor. But he basically goes in there and says, we're going to build a space program from nothing, and by the end of the decade, we're going to walk on the moon. That's bonkers. If somebody proposed something like that today, they'd be laughed out of the room. Politico would be like, how did it play? But to do that, and then America did it, is wild. And that's exactly the type of thing that political speeches should be, something that inspires us to a cause, and then maybe we actually go out and do it. And that's not too hard a thing to rekindle, but I on the humor point, I think one of the biggest problems is there's a lack of shame in our politics. Shame used to be a real guardrail. A lot of people just don't have it anymore. And the other is humor. When Obama was at his best on the campaign trail, it's when he'd kind of uncork a stand-up routine to go after his political opponents, rather than nicknaming them or demonizing them or saying like, they're out to destroy America or whatever. He'd just kind of ridicule them a little bit. And it worked really well. Audiences ate it up, and it's just taking someone down with humor is often the best way to do it. And there are very few people that try to do that anymore. First thing I'm thinking of again is the Fetterman social media campaign.
There was on this though, we have a question from the audience that I think fits well here, Cody. I didn't really even recognize this, the tan suit crisis, and how did you guys handle that without laughing out loud?
We did laugh out loud.
I remember that speech too. He came out with a tan suit. It was bizarre that the world was focused only on the suit. I actually remember him coming out to the briefing room in the suit. I do not remember what he was talking about. I remember it being important.
Yeah,
that was the effect.
I remember. I want to say it had something to do with like Iraq and Ukraine and some economic indicators, and just a muddled message. I wasn't there that day because it was August, right? We stagger your vacations in August, and he was wearing a tan suit because it was August in DC, which is hot as hell. And what's funny is, to this day, I just saw him last week because he came to a wedding between two staffers. To this day, he maintains that suit was a good idea and it looked good on him. He violated the rules of genteel Washington, and you just do not do that.
Genteel Washington. I think we are loud here in Washington, but we really can't take any criticism without fainting.
Well, that is one of those times where I'm glad that I am young, and that during that time I was completely unaware of the tan suit crisis. Totally.
Good thing
over
2 days.
Good thing you weren't around for Grey Poupon Gate. That was
what was Grey Poupon Gate?
It's because he said he wanted Grey Poupon in like a
he just said he liked
food restaurant or something.
He just said he liked Dijon mustard on his burgers, right? And then he didn't even say Grey Poupon, and then people just went and ran with it. These were our scams.
Go back to the Fetterman people, right? Like crudité and just that spread.
You don't eat broccoli with salsa?
I do not. No.
Horrifying.
Do people do that?
Only Dr. Oz, I think.
Oh, all right.
I think we should wrap up with, or begin to wrap up with another one of our audience questions. Another question just came in. Television has lost much of its primacy over the media landscape. It seems harder to reach the public at large through something like State of the Union speech. So how do politicians approach this challenge to ensure their messages reach the public? And are you going to mention the Fetterman campaign again?
well, not now. This has always been a challenge. This is one of those things where it's like every generation thinks it's the worst it's been. Right? You go back to the Cronkite years. You've got 3 networks, and Cronkite would show 7 minutes of a presidential speech on the news and then tell you that's the way it is at the end. Cable comes along. Suddenly you have a ton of different channels. Internet comes along. Now we can create our own news silos and never see a different point of view. Viewership for the State of the Union has been down pretty much every year. There's like a bump for each new president's first one, but it's been coming down for decades. And it's going to keep happening, right? And now you've got a million different streaming services. If you want to watch I'm going to go watch President's speech on Peacock or something. I don't know. There's kind of no way around that. So what you do try to do is just meet people where they are. And what I mean by this is in 2014, we actually tried to take this on in the White House, and Dan Pfeiffer organized a group of outside advisors from Silicon Valley to just kind of come in, and we did like a 2-day session in the Roosevelt Room over a weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And this is people from Google, Twitter, Apple, all sorts of places. And we asked them, like, what would you guys do to kind of navigate this world? And a couple of interesting things came out of it. We created the first Office of Digital Strategy in the White House, and they did more than just update the website and social media content, but they actually helped us disseminate the speech to very specific outlets in interesting ways. Another thing Pfeiffer came up with was kind of bypassing the gatekeepers, and this infuriated the White House press corps. But Obama started giving interviews with people that aren't reporters. He would push Obamacare on ESPN to try to get healthy young men to sign up. He did Between Two Ferns with Zach Galifianakis, and that ended up being the single biggest sign-up day to that point. Did things with Wired, went to Alaska to really kind of show that climate change was here and now with Bear Grylls. Anything like that, to just sort of get to people where they are. You might have some kid who loves Between Two Ferns and could care less about politics. And my daughter's home, and that just kind of works that way. So, but can you force people to tune into a speech? No, not necessarily. You can try to make them events, but it doesn't always work.
All right. Well, we've grilled you for about an hour. Cody Keenan, thanks so much. Congratulations on writing the book. Go White Sox. Go Michigan, not Northwestern.
Tough interview.
Tough, but fair, I think.
I have no sports opinions, so.
Okay.
My little Grace just came through the door. Gracie, come here. You want to be on TV? Come here. Hi, this is Grace.
Hi, Grace.
You say hi.
Hi, Grace.
Good job.
So, like in closing out, let me just ask you this last question, Cody. I do this all the time. When do you? Is there advice you would give to anyone universally about a day 11 or another big moment in history? How do you assess that? How should you at least look at that? Whether it's a shooting or the Supreme Court upholds a law that you think is very important.
How should we look at it? How do we determine if it's important?
Yeah, and just, is there a mindset you should have, like the arc of the moral universe is long or something like that?
Yeah, and I mean, that the arc of the moral universe quote is great, but I want people to remember that whenever you want to get down, whenever Obama was campaigning in 2008 and deployed that quote, he always followed it up with, but it doesn't bend that way on its own. It bends because people march and organize and push until we reach that higher place. And I think that's the most important part of that quote.
Gotcha. All right. Well, Cody Keenan, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.